I'm Tamron Hall. The News Nation is following developing news. New reaction from the Romney campaign after comments made by Romney during a private fundraiser in Florida where he said he would, quote, eliminate several government agencies if he were president. NBC campaign embed Garrett Hake heard the former governor make the comments while he was outside the fundraiser at an estate in Palm Beach. Romney said, quote, I'm going to take a lot of departments in Washington and agencies and combine them. Some eliminate, but I'm not going to lay out just exactly which ones are going to go. In the past hour, though, Romney aides say the former governor was just throwing out ideas. And joining me now, MSNBC contributor, radio talk show host Michael Smerconish, and conservative radio show host Steve Deace, who's a conservative and is not a fan of Mitt Romney. We know that. So, Steve, I'm going to start off with you here and ask you if you could look at this objectively, even though you are not a fan of Romney. He's at this fundraiser. He talks about perhaps combining the education department, even eliminating the Housing Urban Development Agency, an agency his father once headed. What do we make of all of these comments and the response that he was just tossing around, chewing the fat, if you will, at this fundraiser?
Well, Tamron, I think this is the Etch-a-Sketch candidate on display. Something tells me we're going to have this conversation a lot over the next few months between the Romney who may accidentally spew out some principles, and then the minute he faces some scrutiny, he walks them back. I read the Wall Street Journal's account of this meeting this morning, and I thought, be still my beating heart. We might actually have something here. But lo and behold, it's barely the noon hour in some places here in the United States of America, and Mitt Romney has already walked back these kinds of statements that might actually galvanize his base, might actually have a real debate with the president. And I mean, this is the problem with Mitt Romney, and this is exactly why there wasn't a second term for President Ford, a second term for George Herbert Walker Bush, a first term for Bob Dole, or a first term for John McCain. When the American people are faced with a decision between one liberal and liberal light, they always go with the outright liberal every single time.
Interesting you point out, Steve, some of these things, such as the Department of Education and also perhaps eliminating the housing and urban development, that would appeal to his base. But here, given this opportunity, his campaign, Steve, says, well, again, he was just talking out some ideas, nothing specific here.
Well, the idea of reaching out to independents, that's difficult to do because often what motivates and galvanizes independent voters is beyond your control as a challenger, and that usually are economic issues that have to deal with what kind of job the current incumbent is doing. So Romney needs to worry about controlling what he can control. And right now what he can control is galvanizing his own base. He can't worry about what galvanizes voters that are going to be motivated by circumstances that are beyond his control.
Michael, our first read team points out in an interview with Weekly Standard earlier this year, Romney said one of the things he found out in his short campaign against Ted Kennedy was that when he was specific, for example, eliminating the Department of Education, that these things were used against him, if you will. So now in public, in his stump speeches, he's not very specific on the changes. What would he eliminate? What would he cut? But then he goes to this private fundraiser in Florida, and he gets specific behind closed doors.
The surprise to me was that he said these things post-primary season, because I think we really are now post-primary season, when this would have engendered support among Republican primary voters when he really needed them. And when I read the quotes, Tamron, the first reaction that I had is this doesn't sound like a candidate who's making an effort to tack toward the center. Interesting that, you know, Steve loves the fact that he offered these thoughts and is disappointed that he then backed off from them.
Right.
I read it with a different glance, which was to say, if he stuck to these guns, it's the sort of thing that helps him with the base. I don't know that it helps him with independence. My suspicion is that it would not, and now he has his eye on that prize.
Well, to your point, Michael, and perhaps that's why he would say these things in private. He's in Florida with some high-dollar fundraisers, donors who might perhaps want to hear that, and that's why he's not saying it out in public, because, to your point, it would turn off independents. But let me bring this up. Another point he talked about was Hispanic voters, acknowledging that that party has a big problem. 20% of in some of the swing states, the voters are Hispanic. He says we have to get Hispanic voters to vote for our party. He tossed around the idea of a Republican Dream Act, but we know, Michael, he all but slayed Rick Perry when he offered any compassion to students in Texas who might want to get an education but could be in this country illegally or their parents here illegally.
Yeah, the primary season really was devoid of any constructive conversation about what to do other than strengthening the borders. And on that, every one of the candidates, however many they numbered at that time, were all in agreement. But when you then talked about path toward citizenship, you remember what happened to Newt Gingrich, even in addition to Governor Perry. When Gingrich said some things supportive of a path toward citizenship, immediately his numbers started to compress.
And Steve, on two other things that Romney was overheard discussing at this private fundraiser, deductions. He said, I'm going to probably eliminate for high-income people the second home mortgage deduction, probably limit or eliminate deductions for state income tax, state property tax. By virtue of doing that, we'll get the same tax revenue, but we'll have lower rates there. He also, as I pointed out, went on to talk about this Republican Dream Act. Here you are, a conservative. How do these words play out to you? Even if, again, his campaign says he was just tossing these things out there.
Well, any good football coach, Tamron, will tell you if you're going to go over the middle, you might as well catch the ball anyway, because when the safety comes over the top, he's going to jack you up whether you caught it or not. And overall, we keep seeing Romney do this over and over again. He goes over the middle to get a first down, then he gets some alligator arms, doesn't make the catch, and, you know, his political opponents, in this case, the free safety, comes over the top, and they rock him anyway. I mean, it doesn't do any good to be malleable with your principles, to be half measured with your principles. It doesn't do any good. He gets all the exact same criticism anyway, and then he gets none of the credit because he doesn't draw really stark contrasts with the President of the United States. And if he doesn't, history has shown, if you'll pardon the expression, the American people will choose the devil they know over the devil they don't.
Okay, and let me go to Michael on the comments also overheard from Ann Romney at this this was one hot event, Michael. Ann Romney and Mitt Romney were described as giddy over last week's Hillary Rosenflap. In fact, Ann Romney said, quote, "It was my early birthday present for someone to be critical of me as a mother, and that was really a defining moment, and I loved it." She is, again, described as being giddy over what went down last week. So they obviously, Michael, see that as a win for them.
Well, I think I understand why they say that, and it's hard for us to understand because probably the three of us are political junkies, eating, sleeping, drinking, all of these things. But for much of the country, last week was the first real look they got at Ann Romney, and I think that it suited the Romney campaign to have her seen in that context and to have her respond so strongly to the Hillary Rosen comments. So, yes, it was a win for them in that regard last week.
Is it, though, Michael? I mean, you've got this other comment that's resurfaced from Romney, who said prior to this that he wanted welfare moms, for lack of a better description, to have the dignity of work, that he'd be willing to subsidize daycare to all of those parents so they can go to work, so they can have the dignity of work. So in one case, he associates, Steve and Michael, work for a woman as being a dignified thing, but in this case with his own wife, that's at least not how it's being processed. Steve, I'll let you get in, and Michael after that, please.
Well, I think there's a big difference between talking about welfare recipients and somebody who volunteers to stay home, as my wife does, and raise their children. I think there's a dramatic difference there, and I think to Michael's point, they should be getting.
Right, but we're talking about the key word here for me anyway is dignity. The dignity of work. You're absolutely right. There is a difference in lives, and we can roll this out, but he said the dignity of work, associating it with something that of pride, something that makes you feel valued, Steve.
You don't think most people don't get some sense of value out of their job and their career and doing it well and you know, contributing to society and providing for their families? I certainly do.
If you're lucky, you do. But when we were talking about at-home moms, he was saying, of course, you have this choice. But when you narrow the scope, Steve, to women who, for whatever reason, don't have these luxuries in life, that would perhaps allow you to be home with your children, to care for your children. My mother worked and lived a second part of her life as an at-home, so I had the privilege of seeing both sides of this coin here. What I'm talking about, though, Steve, is what he refers to as the dignity of work for these women. As if they can't have dignity at home raising their children. I think that your wife at home would certainly see that as a dignified job, as Ann Romney does.
I guess I just think that you measure dignity in a country by how many people no longer need welfare, not how many people are currently receiving it. And I understand the point that he is making here, and you're putting me in a tough position because I'm defending Mitt Romney, but on this one he is correct. But yet again, this is where he gives a half-measure answer, and he gets ripped no matter what he says. You might as well go ahead and throw out your principles there. You're not going to get any credit for not doing it.
Quickly, Michael, I'm sorry, we got a few seconds. What are your thoughts here in the dignity comment with the women who are not able? Go ahead.
I don't think Ann Romney's going to get held accountable for what her husband said in that regard. And my observation is simply that she was handed an opportunity to portray herself as the champion of stay-at-home moms. She took it. She ran with it. It was a victory for her last week.
All right, Michael, thank you very much. Steve, thank you both as well. I'll talk to you fellas soon. Thank you.